I have no memory. I was driving, and then somewhere about a couple miles later is where the accident happened. And then next thing I recall is a blip.
Hi, I'm Katie.
And I'm Diane.
15 years ago, we met in rehab.
And we've been besties ever since.
We've both worked hard at healing our addictions.
And we've gone on to build meaningful lives.
I'm a licensed therapist and a yoga instructor.
And I'm an embodiment coach and tantra healer.
When we get together, our conversations can get intense.
But they're always lively and full of surprises.
Yes!
And no topic is off limits.
And that's our show.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of We Can Relate. Today's topic
is dissociation. It's a word you hear a lot thrown around. Some of you may be familiar, some of you might know you do it. Some of us, this might be an introduction and a realization process.
That's right, and we wanted to first start off with the definition, where it comes from. It has its roots in Latin, and it comes from the word dis, which means apart, and dissociare, which means to join or associate. So basically to be apart from joining, right? So your something is disconnected. And I also found a really great paragraph on explaining what dissociation is in a little bit more of a full way as we were doing the research for this topic. So I wanted to share that with all of you, and I'll tell you where you can find more on this. So this description says, images of physical, and it's talking about dismemberment as dissociation. Images of physical dismemberment are often used in fairy tales, dreams, and art to depict psychological fragmentation, numbing, and other forms of disconnection. Such cutoffs, dissociations, and splits may be related to earlier relational trauma and constitute defenses against experiences perceived as too overwhelming for consciousness to absorb or even acknowledge. Experience can be dissociated or dismembered, so they're kind of using it in similar terms, behaviorally, emotionally, bodily, and by denying memory or knowledge of events. Jungian analyst Donald Kalshed posits an inner dynamic that is both protective and persecutory. Such understandings can point the way to a healing process of remembering. So talking about dismemberment and remembering. So remembering those parts that have been cut off, thereby giving disowned feelings and experience a fully felt place in consciousness.
Okay.
So much.
That's a lot to digest.
It
Normally
is.
this would be where I'd go, can you say that one more time so we can digest it? But if you were to distill down even further, like, what are we talking about with dissociation for people that maybe you're like, I don't even, like, what are we doing here? Like, how would you break this down?
Define it. So the way I would break it down is just that it's this idea of the psyche having this protective mechanism in the form of dismemberment, dissociation, cutting off, right? And so one example, like as they're talking about it in this particular paragraph that we could bring in, is if someone has child sexual trauma, like they were molested or raped, often that child won't remember that because the psyche has this, really beautiful in a way, protective mechanism that says, this would be too much for you to bear, so we're going to erase this from your memory. It's like when people get into terrible accidents, sometimes they're just like, I have no memory of this. And the brain remembers everything, pretty much, we know. So it means that there's this psychic way that the brain protects itself, and it does that through this dissociation.
That's actually really interesting because as you were speaking into that, I was having, for the first time so I was in a near-death accident when I was 16, and I was thinking about how you can have no memory of, and I was like, well, that's shock, right? But then I was like, well, actually, it's this wonderful, magical thing. Like when I was found at the scene, I was awake and conscious and blah, 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 but I I have no memory. I was driving, and then somewhere about a couple miles later is where the accident happened. And then next thing I recall is a blip of an MRI.
Wow.
And hollering because I had pain in one of my toes. They didn't know. Anyways, there was a blip, and then in the hospital. And it's amazing. But what I was told back was that I had been awake and conscious. And I just think it's so fascinating that all these years later, my mind has still kept a buffer around the details of what happened in this horrific accident. Thank goodness. Thank you, body.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a gift. It's the gift of this magical.
It's a gift and a curse, right?
Gift and a curse.
It's a gift for the beginning when we need it. And then there are times when, as they're saying here, we want to remember. We want to put back these things that have been fragmented when the ego strength, the inner ability, is strong enough to be able to bear what was once unbearable, which is why we dissociate in the first place.
Right. That's really incredible. Really quick, to clarify, ego strength.
Yes, ego strength. So, this is, I have to kind of go into this.
That's okay.
Okay.
Teach us.
If we look at the ego in terms of a structure, we look at the self, higher self, our fullness, our wholeness as a structure. We have the superego, the ego, and the id. So the id would be considered like our base instincts, right?
The primal stuff?
Primal stuff. And sort of more impulsive, not as thought out, just I want what I want when I want it.
Food, sex, sleep.
Yeah, it's often how people think about the word ego, actually, even though, I don't know how to say this, there's different, people think of ego as something bad. I'm not using it like that. The ego to me is that middle structure that can either serve the base instincts, like you're talking about the id, or it can serve the superego, or what I would call the higher self, which is our aspirational values, our deeper values, the things, the person we want to be.
Okay. And that's the superego is the person we aspire to be. Because I would have think superego is a narcissist.
Exactly.
Like that's what one might associate. So this is great.
Yeah.
So thank you for some layman's terms. We've got superego, which is aspirational, highest spiritual conscious self. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would call it.
Yeah.
I'm
And
sure
then
people would disagree, but I would call it that.
We've got id, which is lizard brain.
Lizard brain.
Like, ready to
That's
foaming
right.
at the mouth, like, okay,
Yes.
got it. And then the ego in the in-between is the decider.
Yeah, so the ego is the moderator between below and above, right?
Okay.
And so a lot of people think, oh, they have so much ego. They're using it in a different sense, not necessarily the psychological sense that we're using it here, which is that if you have a weak ego, so you can think of it like a weak inner moderator, then what that means is you're going to be dominated mostly by your primal instincts because your ego's weak.
Fragile ego.
Yeah.
So somebody who has a fragile ego, they aren't able to moderate. Like,
Let me think about
this
that.
is interesting. Our
Is it?
topic is maybe going up.
I know, but wait, we'll
This
bring
is
it back.
good.
We'll bring
It's
it back.
juicy.
We'll bring it back.
When's
A
yours
fragile ego. I mean, I'm wondering if when people say fragile ego,
When I think of that in association
Yeah.
to this, I'm thinking, oh, they go into reptilian reactivity because they're so, I don't know.
okay,
Yeah.
that
like,
way it would link, yes.
Yeah, is what I'm thinking of. Like,
Yeah.
oh, the ego is so fragile that they explode into being dragged around by this id identity of the lower base primal self
Yes.
that doesn't have any connection with higher consciousness of the aspirational of like, this is who I intend to be, but I haven't learned I've done enough
Yeah.
work to learn how to drive my own Ferrari, to navigate my wild emotions and myself.
I think that's a really good explanation. Thank
Okay.
you, Diane.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation for it.
Okay, so
fragile
tying that
ego.
back to dissociation.
So we want to, basically when I say ego strength, we want to build the ego in a positive way to get it to be able to withstand difficult feelings, difficult situations. If there's something that comes in that it would want, that's impulsive, that the ego can bear the consciousness of going, wait, do I actually want to act from my more primitive instincts here? Or do I want to serve a higher value or a different value that may or may not be different than the base instinct? So it's
It's the ability to, like, building the muscle to have discernment.
That's right.
And self-command, self-mastery, self-leadership.
That's right.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes. So what happens is when we dissociate is we can't bear the difficult feeling. It's too much for us. We sort of short circuit. And so I think that's our topic today.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
Wait, can you say that one more time? Because
Sure.
that just landed for me. The bearing the, can you say what you just said?
Yeah. So when we can't bear the difficult feelings,
Yeah.
it's kind of like we short circuit in the brain and we float off and we dissociate because whatever, for me, it's a floating off. For other people, it looks different. But we can't bear what's there. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's feeling unrelated to or judged. But there's something so powerful that we cannot bear it consciously, and so we go to this other dimension.
You know, and it's interesting too. By the way, I got distracted for a second because I was looking at you and I was like, can we just nerd out for fucking ever?
Oh my God, yes. I know. I know, it's so fun.
Like, you're so cool. Will you be my best friend?
Already there.
Yeah. So what I'm noticing or what I'm thinking about is like, okay, so my lizard self is so triggered and this is so overwhelming to that primal self that then this floating off, which is how it tends to appear for me, this like disappearing. Think out there, for those of you listening, if you or anyone you've been with, if you've noticed somebody just, or experienced just sort of not there anymore. You're there and then you're just not.
You've
or they're
gone
just
somewhere.
not. Like checked out, left the room. That's one way it can manifest. And I'm thinking how that actually has almost like there's a sort of an ethereal spiritual sense to like it's the lizard and then the spiritual, and it's like, how do we bring these back together into a more conscious way? And there's just something symbolic.
Oh, absolutely. I had a dream once that I had shared with my analyst, and in the dream, there was a hole in the sky, and I was in one world, and then in the dream, I went through the hole in the sky. And what we came to discover about that image was an image of me dissociating, that I was in this one world, I couldn't bear it anymore, so I had to go through this hole in the sky to this other land. It's like, oh, that's a symbol of how I'm dissociating. And I want to just say this before I forget.
It's so fun.
It's the funnest, you know. So the whole quote that I share with you, I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due, is from This Jungian Life podcast. And there are 3 Jungian analysts who are amazing. This was episode 60, Psychological Dismemberment, Why We Can't Stay Connected. So if you like this episode that we're doing today on dissociation, be sure to listen to their podcast and check it out.
And thank you to them because they've been really, really inspiring and insightful along the way for both of us. So.
Absolutely.
This is such juicy, yummy stuff. And for me, a story that comes in for this is, so I remember in one of my times in treatment, when I was 19, one of the therapists, we were having our one-on-one session, and she said, do you know how that you dissociate a lot? And I didn't know dissociation yet. I was like, I do what? And she said, yeah. By the way, hi, Lorraine.
Aww.
She was really, really wonderful. But she said, I was watching you at dinner, and apparently, we had community group meals, shared meals, and that she'd been just observing, as they do, and she watched me and she said, I just saw the way you were there, and then for the rest of the meal, just not in the room at all. And she's like, and I noticed that, and I thought it was interesting. And then I started watching it through the rest of the week. I've been just sort of observing you, as they do. And she's like, and just noticing how often there's a subtle, just sudden drift in your way and not here a lot of the time. And it was so upsetting to me.
Yeah. Aww.
It was sweet because she meant it from such a loving place. One, to feel so seen, because that's a thing for me, as we know. But and to be observed. But also embarrassed or like sort of like, wait, what? Well, where do I go? And why do I do that? And she said, she's like, it's a trauma thing, and it's somehow in your body. You feel like you're not, like there's not safety or something, and you just go to a far off. It's almost, for me, I think of it like pixelating into almost like dust off to somewhere. Just like,
yeah. Yeah.
Gonna go away for a while, and it was just really concerning that I didn't know I did it. And it's something that certainly the function of the dysfunction in a lot of addiction, this can be the case. It was for me with the bulimia, was a way to dissociate, disconnect from the overwhelming reality of my existence. But it's also like I would do it through. I knew it made sense to me that I did it in things like that were more aggressive, like binging or even other escapism stuff. But just to be there and then not there and not know I wasn't there seemed really, really scary. So that's kind of my story, is it doesn't necessarily just have to be something jarring
Obvious.
like being high.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's almost like being high, but the consciousness goes off into
another place. Yeah, I think it's always scary when we don't know or see something about ourselves that other people see. Like that can be very vulnerable in therapy or something when someone sees something in you and you weren't aware of it yet. It's very scary and can be very humbling.
Yeah.
But this does happen to so many of us, and I'm wondering for you listening, are there times you've dissociated? Where have you dissociated? I would ask you, like, what feelings, maybe start to consider what feelings cause dissociation. Because, like, for me, yes.
Oh, I was just thinking, it reminds me of maybe this is where you're headed, but where your analyst used to ask you, like, before you'd purge, and I hope it's okay that I'm speaking into this, but
yes, of course.
She used to be bulimic, y'all.
Like for 15 years, which I talk about
like,
in many
spoiler,
of the episodes.
I feel like that was wrong of me to speak into. Like, I'm sorry. Was like, that's your story.
I was a raging bulimic, and I do talk about it in other episodes, and I have no qualms about talking about it.
In this episode? Yeah.
Yeah, no, so you are fine to always talk about that. Yes.
Okay, what I'm thinking of is how you sharing with me how she would be like, well, what were you feeling before you purged? And you'd be like, I don't know.
And I'd be like, I don't have any feelings.
There were none. And it was like,
Yes, and I really believed when I would binge and purge that it had nothing to do with feelings. I just wanted the food. I just couldn't stop for whatever reason. And, I didn't realize it was connected to unbearable feelings that I had. And it's really amazing how...
And truly believe that, like, get upset and defensive of like, no, I don't know. There's nothing here, nothing.
Yeah, like, I know. And how long it took me to really realize, oh, I'm really angry at this thing that happened, or I felt super misunderstood, or I feel desperate about my life in this way, and I need to fix that feeling, right?
Fix that feeling or escape that feeling, like just eject.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's the dissociation of the act of moving into an addictive behavior, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then go somewhere else?
Well, a couple of places. One is just that I can relate to what you're saying about floating away, because even now in my own analytic work, once in a while, I now have enough of the observing self to realize when I'm dissociated, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? But I know I floated away because I'm present enough to know I'm here, to know my analyst is with me, to know she's observing that I'm dissociating, but also not able to bring her back yet. Like, and I'll go into like kind of a trance, or like I'll look like have a stupor, like a stupor, like
that, just sort of.
And it's like usually as soon as I do that, she'll go, oh, there are feelings here. And eventually it brings me back. And when I can learn to tolerate and talk about the feelings, the dissociation goes away.
Yeah.
But it's not an easy thing, and it can be very sneaky.
Yeah, these overwhelming, and it can't, that's the thing, the subtleties of how this can come in, and just with the intention of protecting us. But
that's right.
It's a learning to re-associate, remember is its own coming back for those of us who have been through trauma, addiction, etc. Like, it's this, and we'll get into tips and tools, but it's this learning to come home, because for me, I started to really lean into leaving home symbolically, literally, etc., because it just did not feel safe and and livable. And so it's just really interesting. Was there, you said there was maybe another story, or was there somewhere else you were going to go?
Just I was thinking about, how even though the eating disorder was essentially healed, I still have, my first reaction is to, when I have too big of feelings, is to still want to, or to try to dissociate. And one of the times it came up most recently in my life was when I was in a marriage that wasn't healthy for me. And this was during the pandemic as well, so I'm sure that added it in. But the only way, and I didn't realize this at the time, but I'm not a drinker really. I will drink sometimes socially, but I would have wine every night, and it was getting where I wouldn't skip a night. And once in a while I'd have 3/4 of a bottle. Once I had a whole bottle. Like, this is not healthy. It's not good. And I was so confounded of like, wait, why am I doing this? Like, it must be because of the pandemic or stress, because I couldn't bear the fact that I knew somewhere I needed to leave the marriage. Like, I had just gotten married. He had told me he was gonna X, Y, and Z, and I don't think at that time I could bear the reality that this isn't going to work.
Your body already knew.
It already knew.
And so it wanted out.
Yeah, so it was like, oh, I'll just drink wine. It was the only way I could really be with him, because he was so emotionally gone. And yeah.
Oh, go ahead, please continue. I have a thought, but please finish.
Oh no, that was it. It was just that he was so emotionally unrelated that I would drink, and actually I got really nasty with him sometimes because nothing I said ever seemed to land emotionally. And it was only until I got really mean. Like, I said some things I regret, really mean things. And I also feel like that I need to own that. I'm owning that. And he was so provoking in his willfulness around not being related and not doing the inner work he said he was going to do, that it was like, can I reach you? Kind of reminds me of the story you told about your family, about see me and being vitriolic.
Is anyone in there?
Yes, and
say something.
And that's why I can relate
Feel
to
something.
that, because I got.
What do I have to do to get a rise reaction?
Yeah.
Something that I think is so interesting, what you said about with the drinking in your marriage. It was your body knew, or there was the dissociating. Is it disassociating?
Dissociating. Disassociating is more like when you don't want to associate with a person.
Okay.
I think that's how I think of it.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but
so distancing, really. I mean, but
Yeah.
it's the separating from what the body and the intuition, your super ego, your higher self knew.
yeah, perhaps. I don't know if I was aware at that time that I knew. That's the whole dissociation thing. Like, maybe on some level I knew, but on another level, like, I don't know that at the time I was drinking because I was like, I got to make this bearable. Although I knew a little bit, but I just don't think I fully understood, like, why I was doing that.
Well, also, I was just realizing as you were speaking into like the frustration of not just is the marriage not going to work, but like the betrayal in having believed this person was this, and that I'm going to do the work, or this is what it will look like, our relatedness will be, and you can count on me for, and then not to be the case, and the disappointment and the pain of that. Like, it just makes a lot of sense to want to anesthetize from like the devastation of a chosen life partner not holding up their end of what they presented was their commitment.
Yeah, they really, it was
like,
really devastating.
Yeah.
It was devastating.
Yeah, and it makes,
No, just painful.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about relationships I've been in. There was somebody I was dating briefly last year for a while, and what I noticed was initially what drew us together was we would meditate, we'd go to the beach, and we'd eye gaze, and it was beautiful, and I loved that. But the more he tapped out and started doing the discard dance and brought drinking back into it, he was getting a little bit high, and he was drinking at night and stuff, and I noticed myself not really wanting that to be the way we spent time together,
Yeah.
but being like, I still want relatedness and connection. So I'd rather be less alone by you being disconnected and numb. So I'll numb out with you. And then we'd both, like, I'd smoke a little with him, or we would drink a little, and I would just, it was almost meeting in the lowest vibrational frequency, because I wanted to at least meet in some resonant frequency.
Yeah, I needed some kind of connection, so I might as well kind of devolve a little bit.
Yeah, like self-stupefy or like stunt somehow to feel less, to feel something. I don't know. It was just really interesting. And I remember when I realized, oh, wow, the last many times I've seen this person, we've gotten into an altered state, because, that's not my preference, but I just didn't want to feel alone with this person. So I don't know if anybody out there can relate to that, but that's just something to notice. I aspire in my relationships to meet in something bigger and greater and more like
deep and spiritual and delicious
and connected and not disconnected. Yeah,
that's right.
So,
And I think, that so many people could relate to that. I think, there's something in us that might be telling us somewhere. It might be a whisper, it might be a shout, but something's off. And I think what I've really learned is that, coping with the truth is exceptionally hard, and coping with reality is exceptionally hard. And so one of the problems with dissociation, even though we've talked about it as being protective, which it also is that it doesn't let us live in reality. And it can convince us to make choices and act in ways that will sort of validate the worst parts of ourselves. Like dissociating from the feeling of, for example, like, I want more connectedness, but this guy isn't giving it to me, but I can't bear being unconnected. I'll dissociate from that. But then I'll still meet him here, which really isn't healthy for me. Same thing in my prior relationship.
almost like conscious self-abandoning.
Yeah, in a way. And I do think it takes a lot of strength and work to land your 2 feet firmly in reality and firmly in the truth, and especially in your own truth. Right? It's so hard. It was so hard for me to really say, this person is not for me.
Yeah.
This thing that I thought was going to be something that lasted a long time isn't the thing I thought at all. And I have to follow the inner truth no matter how hard it is. That, or I could have just kept drinking and become an alcoholic and stayed in something that was toxic for me. I was getting sick, physically getting sick.
Wow. Yeah, it makes me think of the episode we did where I spoke into how I hadn't spoken into, I was deep in bulimia again as a part of my everyday existence. And finally, and I hadn't spoken to anyone about it for years, fully authentically, or wasn't owning it to myself, and just had, this is my lot in life, my life's albatross. And this coach I'd been working with, I came back after a devastating trip with my family where I was hiding it and I got away with it, but I felt awful because I'd gotten away with it and I was so alone with my pain, and it was just so much, and finally, and I just burst. And she said, have you ever thanked your eating disorder for what it protected you from having to feel? And it's like there were so much truths that I wasn't ready to interface yet, and it was like that was sort of the gift of it. But I want more. The life I want is one that's based in truth and reality, and has that ego strength, the muscle to bear what is true and real, even if it's unpalatable or difficult or means making radical life changes or being in the suffering.
Yeah, I saw the funniest thing on Instagram the other day that I probably will not say correctly, but it was somebody saying, it was like a little meme or something where the person's like, so I listened to my therapist and I started feeling my feelings, and essentially that shit is terrible. Like, why does anybody do that? Like, and it was funnier than how I said it, but it's so true. It's like when you actually can sit in the feelings, which I still have a hard time to this day doing because they're so hard. But when you can do that, you do build the strength to know, okay, I can survive this. I can get through it.
Yeah.
And you will. And I do know that about myself now.
And the resilience that comes with
Yes.
bearing what seems unbearable. It's
That's
the
right.
illegitimate versus legitimate suffering,
That's
and
right.
and the growth that comes from going through adversity and being like, I can bear what was seemingly unbearable. But
Yeah.
I'm thinking about I'm thinking of how unbearable it might have felt to be like to reconcile.
Yeah.
This isn't the person, and
Yeah.
this, because of all of the other things that go with it.
That's
of like,
right.
if I acknowledge this truth, well, then that opens the gate for all these truths. And oh my gosh, it makes me think of my locked bedroom.
Oh, man.
God. So, should I hear?
Well, you have to feel ready to
Yeah,
share.
I mean,
I don't
okay,
think
so
it's that bad,
it's just
but
funny.
you think it's bad.
So in my condo in Florida, it's like super minimalist, serene space, temple sanctuary. Like, it's one of my friends calls it the resort and the retreat. Like, she's like, this is the best. She stayed with me for a surgery recovery. She's like, this is the best surgery recovery center I could ever stay at. Like Hotel Diane. Like
Hotel Diane. That's probably an actual hotel. Sounds fancy.
It's very curated, very clean, immaculate. Then I have the second bedroom, aka my garage, that
My garage.
which is where I shove all the shit I don't want to think about, deal with, look at, sort through. It's like anything unpalatable that I can't be bothered to deal with
Yes.
just goes in there, and then I talk to, and I've at
And then
times
you
pulled
lock
it out.
the door.
Yeah, well, I put the lock on the door before this person, the one I started drinking with a little bit, but before I ever let him come over, I was like, well, he can't see the second room, so I had a handyman come put a key lock on the door, because heaven forbid he see the parts
mess.
of me,
Yes.
the unpalatable, undigestible,
I mean, and
symbolically.
it's such a symbol of compartmentalization. It's a symbol of dissociation in a way, but also not, because you're aware of it. But it's like, I'm not ready to share this, and I think it's so relatable. It's
the
so
parts
relatable.
of ourselves we don't want to deal with, look at, have to acknowledge,
Yeah.
contend with. Can I just and then lock the door, and
we
there's-
do that, right?
For
We do
sure,
that.
symbolically, it's pretty funny, and it is a work in progress. It's going to be temple space soon enough, but I just this idea of I just would rather not, and so much of and bringing it around to integrate full circle. I've moved into a place where I'm committed in my life to being as integrated as possible. Integrated meaning woven together, not fragmented, not fractured, not split apart, not in denial of these truths. And so, yeah, it's interesting. One of my questions that came up as we were talking about this is, do you feel like, or has there been, or is there now a part of you? You said you can recognize when you're
I'm
dissociated, and you
yes.
kind of can work on bringing yourself back. Did you ever actively choose to dissociate, of like, oh, I'm overwhelmed, I'm out of here?
Oh,
Like,
I probably, maybe not in the floating away thing,
Yeah.
but in the act of the bulimia
Yeah.
or whatever the numbing out was. But
Yeah.
I think this is a process to, if we're going to talk about, well, how do we heal from dissociation? Number one, some of it's not within our control, because it's the psyche's protective mechanism. And
Yeah.
if it's there for a reason.
Yep.
So that isn't always within our control. However, if you are bringing consciousness to it and trying to gently bring in this awareness, I think there's a process that happens, like, you brought in the concept of do less harm, and I don't want to get away from your question, but
Yeah.
I think I dissociated a lot. I don't know if I did it consciously. Yeah, I mean, I did it, especially when it would be like, well, I'd be like, fuck it, I'm gonna binge and purge.
Yeah,
like,
fuck it.
from that place, it was like, I'm choosing. I can't bear this. I'm choosing.
Yeah.
So I would say consciously I did, and I've also done it unconsciously.
Yeah, I just was thinking about different ways it's shown up in my life, and I'm, in one arena where I was, in my history with having been involved in some sex work stuff, like, and it was so unbearable thinking that's like the best I could do, the only value I had. I remember, like, actively the distress, and like actively being like, I'm just gonna leave, like, I'm just gonna not be here, and then I'm gonna like take my money and go home later, like, and then just be grateful for the money. And I wouldn't come back again until like into my body until I was like with my money. But it was just like, and I would actively be like, which is interesting. I'm trying to think of this relationship to consciousness, because I actively would be like, it was almost like this caretaker would be like, this is awful. And you don't feel like you have much of an agency in what you're putting yourself through. Like, it was a really interesting thing. And so it was like, we're just gonna come with me and we're just gonna leave. And I would actively just like consciously channel myself out of myself.
Yeah, I mean,
which seems kind of strange to be able to do that. And then learning in full circle, it's like consciously choosing to go offline. And now how much work I've done in consciously choosing to learn to come back online, into the body, integrate.
Yeah, it's really, I just want to acknowledge your journey there and your progress, and what a full circle thing to go from abandoning self, abandoning body, leaving because it's unbearable. I can't be here for this.
And I don't know how to do it differently, so I'm just going to be here, but not.
To I can tolerate being here, I can be in my body, and not only that, but I can teach people how to be in their bodies, and like that's a beautiful thing.
And even before getting to that, like the meat of it was like getting to the breaking point of I'm no longer willing to abuse myself by forcing myself to splice and split and not be in my lived experience of this one wild and precious life, as I like to say. Like, it was so self-abusive and betraying that it became its own kind of unbearable. That ultimately brought me home again. Which also through the bulimia, it's like the escape ultimately brought back around home, which is the beauty and the gift of these awful things sometimes we go through that we can make meaning of.
That's right.
You know?
I think that's a beautiful way to say it, and I don't know that I would add more to that, because it is like they can be our dark teachers. They can be the things that, wounded healer, through the wound is how we heal. You went through the wound, we go through the wounds, and then we come out the other side and we've been to hell and back, and we bring the gold with us. So that's kind of the beauty of it. What?
I just am realizing like the timeline of it. Like at the point where I could not keep abandoning my body, and then like hitting a breaking point where I almost took my life, and then ended all of that, and then life really began because it was a renewed commitment to like, no, I'm showing up for this life, and I'm here to live, and I'm here to live in truth with 2 feet planted and rooted into the ground.
That's right.
With full presence, even if it for what feels unbearable, because what feels unbearable is better than like the unbearability of not feeling it all.
That's right.
Oof.
You're like, ew.
I just got chills. But really.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's really true.
It's really true. Okay, so coming around to tips and tools, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think one of the things is just to know that coming out of dissociation is a process. It's not always up to us. So go easy with yourself, be gentle. And to maybe begin to explore what feelings lead you to want to dissociate, like and I think it's different for everybody, like what is so triggering for you that is like, oh, I hate that this happened. A lot of times I think for me it was like feeling unheard or unseen was just like so hard. So yeah, I think trying to consider what feelings are sort of your red flags that could be, oh, these are ones that are hard to bear. Maybe I can practice bearing them in smaller doses or something.
Yeah, I like that. It's almost like, what are the things that send me from level 0 to 12 real fast?
Yes.
For me, I know it's anger was a big one of like, for sure, like, and immediately it would be like, what am I going to binge on? And that was my way of taking out of like bypassing or trying to, because the rage purging was very real. But that one, or the too much stuff, what are the real intense ones, and what are the other ways that, what is it I'm maybe trying to avoid here? And just observing before having to really do anything about that. Like, is there a truth here that I'd rather not acknowledge.
Yes.
And just acknowledging it doesn't even necessarily mean doing anything about
That's
it
right.
yet.
Yeah.
You know?
You don't have to pressure yourself to change if you're not
Yeah.
ready or to be in the truth, but it's, can you be curious?
Yeah, and then in terms of just general numbness, spaciness, not being here, some real practical tips from an embodiment perspective would be a body scan, like really taking that nice deep inhale, and sending awareness down. What can you feel in your body? Where is there tension, or where is it showing up? Slowing the breath. I like to envision actually sending roots down into the earth and almost my energy up into the sky, and I'm the in-between. It's like, makes me think of Primal Spiritual, and like the, you know, it's this, the ego.
The super ego.
Yeah,
ego.
it's like, okay, I'm contained and held down into the earth. Okay, and you know, how can I be more present on a sensory level?
That's right.
Like with maybe hold some ice or wash with cold water or do the act of taste something really intense like lemon or something to bring back into this present moment. Maybe have a really squishy soft blanket that's sensual, or even just hand on heart is a really one I go to a lot of.
It's such a those are such powerful things that we talk about often here, but they're so important to do because things like dissociation or anxiety means we're not in the body, right? We are separated, we are not joined. And so how can we rejoin, remember, come back?
Beautiful. I love that. It's that like that calling home. I really love in my work, one of the greatest feelings for me is supporting others in developing a greater sense of inner safety. I am safe to be in this body fully and feel whatever's here. All of you is welcome. All of me is welcome. And just that really like yummy, nurturing, like a best friend or a mama or like the one, what we would hope for. And I would even say to myself at first, it was so unfamiliar and weird, like after having been at war forever and so spliced. But this integration process of like, I just invite, you know, taking a hand and gently placing it on the heart, closing down the eyes. Maybe it's weird. Maybe it's weird. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's gentle. It's like, I live here.
Aww,
I
love
live
that.
here. I'm safe here.
Yeah.
I'm here. This is my home. I'm here. So just,
Yeah.
And then patience. It's building muscle practice.
Yeah.
So
tell us how you come home to yourself.
yeah. Yes.
Mister just came home. That was a nice synchronicity. So we will look forward to seeing you all next time.
Share with us. How do you call yourself home? Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, save, subscribe.